your data and your ability to continue to operate your organization, I mean, it's worth a lot of money if you're being honest, right? So I think the cost of a data breach as it relates to the value of the data that's stolen, whether or not that's social security numbers, personal identifiable information, whatever, I don't know that that's necessarily trending up. However, what we're seeing is a lot larger data breaches. So again,
trucking is difficult. It's an essential industry that every corner of the nation depends on, even without knowing it. To the average consumer, the supply chain is magic, and sometimes a black hole. Products on store shelves, dinner on restaurant tables, packages on doorsteps. It's expected to be there on time, every time, and only recognized if there's a service failure. But how is a sausage made? Who's talking about the issues that matter to trucking companies?
Welcome to TrueNorth Truck Thought, or the TTT Pod for short. A monthly podcast hosted by Scope Elitist Transportation Consulting and brought to you by TrueNorth Companies. We're here to demystify the magic, address the black holes, and to talk trucking to the industry we love. Whether it's the latest research, upcoming laws and rules, safety issues and solutions, or practical discussions about real-life supply chain challenges, the TTT Pod is here to help the most important industry in our country to navigate its greatest challenges and opportunities. We bring together some of the best and brightest experts to talk about and tackle some of the most pressing industry issues. So without further ado, I'm Steve Kepler.
And I'm Sean Garney. Let's get trucking. While the age of the internet and connected everything has certainly transformed our world, our lives, and our businesses, it has also revealed new vulnerabilities, specifically cyberattacks, which in recent years have been rapidly on the rise. In the early days, attackers weren't focused on transportation. Criminals were mainly targeting governments, financial institutions, and healthcare organizations, with the occasional prankster hacking an electronic construction sign to change the words to something humorous like, "Work is canceled," or my son's personal favorite, "Sorry, Mario, the princess is in another castle." This has changed. According to Statista, the number of data compromises have grown by almost 2,000% from 2005, which saw 157 data breaches in the U.S. compared to 3,205 in 2023. Unfortunately, the transportation industry has become a new and increasingly popular victim. In 2020, the industry saw 21 data breaches compared to 101 last year, a 300% increase. This may not seem like a lot, but IBM estimates that in 2023, the average cost of a data breach in the transportation sector was $4.18 million. It is a big deal. Fortunately, we have friends in the industry tracking these trends and helping companies prepare for and ensure against cyber attacks. Joining us today are two of those friends from TrueNorth Companies. Clay Swanson is Cyber Practice Leader, and Aaron Voss is Vice President of Colleague Technology and Security. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today, and we have been really looking forward to this conversation.
thanks for having us.
You bet.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. So thanks, guys. Thanks, Sean, for that intro. Maybe before we dive in, if you guys wouldn't mind just giving us a few minutes about yourselves and what you do at TrueNorth. Maybe Clay, start with you.
Sure. Excited to be here. Clay Swanson. I am, as you said, cyber practice leader for TrueNorth. I've been with the company for about 5 years, and cyber wasn't always everything that I did, but seems to have taken a bigger place in my life. And I don't say that with any kind of dismay. It's kind of a lot of fun. But I've been in the insurance industry since 2013, right after college, first big boy job. And ever since then, it's just been sticking with it. So I worked from nationwide to Travelers. I was always on the insurance carrier side, had multiple roles, was a people leader, was kind of a production underwriter, then really started dipping my toes into the commercial insurance space right around 2017. And then it kind of evolved to professional liability, cybersecurity. But my role at TrueNorth is all focused on risk management, and cyber being the primary kind of subject matter expertise from an insurance standpoint.
Great. Awesome. Aaron?
So thanks again for having us on. So I have been with TrueNorth for about 12 years, although I've been in the technology industry for 20 plus at this point in my career. So I got started, believe it or not, back in the dial-up days working for a small internet provider. And it's always funny to say something like that to my kids who don't even know that dial-up internet was a thing. Like, what's a landline, right? We just pick up our phone and it works everywhere.
Oh my
right?
goodness.
So I've been around since the early days of the internet. Did a lot of support and configuration stuff like that for internet provider, and then went to school for network management, and then did some computer programming. Worked for a asset management company doing software development for for a nationwide asset management platform, and then joined TrueNorth back in 2012 as the technology lead there. Since then, my role has evolved substantially. Information security is one of those things that I think creeped up on a lot of people very quickly as we went from just those kids trying to mess with signs to it really being impactful and extremely expensive for organizations to ignore. And so I've been focused on information security for probably at least the last 10 years, helping TrueNorth build out their information security posture to a point where we're ready to respond to events and things as they come up. But then also, as we saw more and more clients experiencing cyber issues or having a hard time managing the risk holistically, I partnered with Clay on, not only how do we manage the insurance component of it, right? Because that's a big piece, transferring that risk, but really how do we build out and strategize a plan for the organization to look at it in a meaningful way and in a way that they can adapt to security challenges as they come down the line.
Man, Steve, seems like we got a perfect panel here. We've got the insurance folks that know how to protect against risk, and then we got ones and zeros over here that knows how to actually prevent it. So this is going to be awesome.
Aaron didn't say this, but I want to say it off the top that he's also a certified ethical hacker, which is
he's a white hat. Is that a white hat hacker?
That's right.
Fantastic.
As opposed to a black hat hacker, right?
That's right. Those are the bad ones.
Bad guys.
So
yeah, we don't want those people.
Well, I found that's interesting, Clay, because when Aaron talked about it, he was like, when we were messing with construction signs. So I wonder what your message would have been, Aaron, should you have hacked a sign or two.
I like the nostalgic one. Your Princess is in Another Castle is an absolute classic. And, I think we'll talk more about some of that sort of stuff today. But I think as technology has evolved, even the ability to do things like that has gotten so much easier for people, right? You used to have to understand how all of those signs and stuff worked and all of that. And I always take this little thing with us whenever we go out and talk cyber. I bought this online for like $120. It's called a Flipper Zero. And it has a lot of that capability to be even able to do that stuff just built in. It's stuff that you can just do.
That thing doesn't even have any buttons.
Yeah, it's very simple little thing. And the amount of capability that you have for somebody to just go out and, read a guide offline and figure out how to use something like this it's crazy the way that that's evolved.
And that's amazing. We talked about the rise of this, and we do want to talk about sort of the magnitude of the risk and how that's changed. But one of the reasons why I feel like maybe we're becoming so vulnerable is because of all the tools we're implementing into our systems. One of those tools is AI. And I'm sure white hat hackers, black hat hackers are developing tools using AI now to become better hackers. So AI may be helping us, but we have to be extremely vigilant because the AI is building tools to hack. I mean, you bought one for $100.
Yeah, absolutely. And, if we think about, one of the biggest risks to any system, unfortunately, as it is, are the people that are utilizing that system, right? Computers, for the most part, do what it is that they're supposed to do. Humans, on the other hand, have good days. They have bad days. They just want to get through,
Speak
to
for
get
yourself.
to the end. Yeah. They just want to be able they just want to be able to get out and go play golf on a Friday afternoon, and they're hurrying up through things. If you think about, social engineering and some of those challenges and what AI could do there, the emails from the prince in a different land that just needs to help transfer some funds that everybody knows of, that's broad. But think about AI being able to write customized messages specific to individuals, what they do, who they are, all of those sort of things. I mean, that's a game changer as far as being able to trick people. And it's real, and it's what we're seeing today.
Well, clearly it's something we need to pay attention to for sure. You're getting me a little scared, but that's why we're having this. I think part of this is an education to help people understand, where potential vulnerabilities are and what they should do about it. Because I think picking up on your points that you can't sit pat. You've got to be proactive on this, because there's folks out there that are trying to unfortunately do bad things. So maybe we'll start with, to your point, Aaron, you started 10 years ago, but it's a lot more activity. You see cyber in the headlines almost every day now. I mean, it's a constant stream. Why do you guys think that's happening, and why do you think it's on the rise?
I'll take a first opinion on that, and then Clay, fill in anything. I think we hit on it earlier, right? Just the amount of technology that's out there and how much it is that organizations are relying upon it, right? I mean, let's take the transportation industry, for example. For a long time, there might have been some technology in some more complicated logistics software and things like that organizations were using, or email systems or whatever. But now we're talking about connected trucks. We're talking about, integrated and automated system, real time, just in time delivery, all of that sort of things. And the complexity around those systems has just blown up. And the way that you manage the risk associated with that has to evolve as well. So technology, just as a general adoption, has skyrocketed. I think we're relying upon third parties a lot more often than we ever did, and giving them more and more control of our organizations. So, it was hard to miss the CrowdStrike headlines from a few weeks ago, right? Industry non-specific as far as how that affected, but all of those organizations have given CrowdStrike that ability to be able to get into, manage their system and deliver the technology that they do. By nature of that technology, it can be risky. And so I think things like that, the amount of power, the adoption of technology, all of those things is driving this ever increasing, security news and just cyber issues.
Yeah, we're on like a continuum that continues to shrink its window of how fast everything technologically speaking is moving, right? The invention of the internet, or the age of the internet, was like a defining moment that changed the entire world. Then it was the cell phone, then it was the smartphone, then it was AI, and now it's AI. And with every efficiency that companies or you as individuals create for yourselves, like technology is always a huge part of that. So it's kind of the light side, dark side of every step you take towards automation, every step you take towards making things more ingrained or automated or digital. You're also opening yourselves up, if you're not thinking about the flip side, because there's bad guys. There have always been bad guys, or just people who are bored sometimes. But that, I think, is never going away, unfortunately. But the thing about, why is it in the headlines? That brings up a whole other conversation of, this is like a sexy topic, cyber. Not a lot of people know about it, but it gets eyeballs because it's scary. Not a lot of people understand it. So I think the news cycle, while in some ways is good because it spreads awareness, it's also shocking to see. We were only seeing probably a small fraction of the actual events that are taking place, because it's not cool anymore to have a news story about the Nigerian prince who scammed some grandma out of her, life savings. That was news in the 90s. But now it's CrowdStrike or MGM and the sphere, like that AI generated image of the sphere being down. I mean, that was like Elon Musk, I think, tweeted it. It's just like, okay, what are we doing here, people? Let's focus on trying to fight the good fight. But sometimes I don't know, it's job security, I guess, but it's also, it's not going away, unfortunately.
Yeah, I can see where you're coming from as far as like it's a sexy topic, and that's why maybe we get a lot of eyeballs on these types of things. But of course, the cyber criminals, they must have motivations too, and And I get a little confused by that, right? Because every once in a while I get something from Experian that says, oh, you have, 2 potential instances of your contact information on the dark web. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, I don't even know what that means or why I should care. What are the overall motivations of cyber criminals? Like, how do they make it?
Yeah. Your data and your ability to continue to operate your organization, I mean, it's worth a lot of money if you're being honest, right? So I think the cost of a data breach as it relates to the value of the data that's stolen, whether or not that's social security numbers, personal identifiable information, whatever, I don't know that that's necessarily trending up. However, what we're seeing is a lot larger data breaches. So again, just within the last week, the largest drop of stolen information ever got dropped on the dark web. I mean, you're talking millions and millions and millions of records out there, right? And so if you can steal that data from an organization and then you can sell it to somebody that wants to buy that, the criminals are making money off of that particular process. Different records worth different things. So that's one revenue stream for them. The other one is ransomware. And ransomware is absolutely huge. And a lot of the times we're seeing a double hit, right? It's hey, we're going to steal your data. And if you don't pay us to not disclose that data, we're going to drop it and sell it. Now, whether or not they actually then do delete it and versus just sell it,
Right.
2 for 1. So that's it. And then ransomware, right? If we can lock you out of a system and we do a good enough job to be able to make sure that you can't restore from your backups and you have no other option, I mean, it's not uncommon to see multi-million-dollar ransom demands from these threat actors. So then they're making a substantial amount of money. And if they can do a couple of those a day, even if you negotiate it down to half of that, that is still tremendous, tremendous profits.
Kind of a numbers game here a little bit, and Clay, you had mentioned that it's all hype. And so I just looked at my router, right? So I have a router, brand name unidentified here, that scans my system on a weekly basis. This last week I had 722,000 scans and they found 116 threats blocked. I'm just a guy in the Midwest, with the upper Midwest. I mean, there's hardly other people around me, and I've got 116 threats blocked. Is this a concern for even just the regular folks? What are they blocking? What are they getting?
No one is off limits. We speak to companies, and TrueNorth works with companies of all different sizes, all different industries. And I know we're talking transportation and trucking, but you as an individual aren't any less special or more valuable. They're going
that's
after
brutal,
everyone.
brother. That was a really harsh thing
I know.
to say.
Sorry to tell you.
I thought we were friends, Clay.
Yeah, that's very special.
I'm not either, if that makes you feel better. I just think the machine is already in motion, right? And how many robocalls do we get? Like, all of our data is out there. To your point earlier of like, okay, Experian, what am I supposed to do with this? But yeah, the law of large numbers. That's why phishing attacks go out to everybody. They're more effective when they go after the CEO or when they peruse LinkedIn and find out that a new intern just got hired at TrueNorth. So we're going to target that person and try to trick them. But like, they're coming at all systems, all vectors. And fortunately, that flip side, or the light side, if we're using the Star Wars kind of analogy here, is cybersecurity is also advanced to the point where now you wouldn't even know that if you paid attention to your router to see that those things are being blocked, and hopefully it works for the most part.
Yeah, there's a lot of crime of opportunity out there, and some opportunities are bigger than others.
Well, it sounds like they're just throwing spaghetti on the wall and hoping something sticks. They're just casting the net so wide, and hopefully something works. It's certainly concerning. So, Clay, you mentioned transportation. So is transportation targeted in your guys' experience more often? And what's unique about transportation that may make it more vulnerable?
Yeah, I think it is. And Sean, in your intro, it wasn't always this way, but I think hackers have gotten smarter in terms of who they're going after and why they're going after. So money is obviously number one motivator for a lot of these groups, but then there's also a subset of these groups that it might be for political reasons, and they're called hacktivists, right? But transportation is part of the supply chain and is critical infrastructure, right? So I think from that standpoint is if there were a major disruption or interruption to any kind of freight being moved from point A to point B on a large scale, that causes a lot of concern beyond just that specific company. It leads to potentially utilities and energy companies going down, or even agriculture. It spreads because transportation is that thread that weaves a lot of these other industries together. So there's that from a motivation standpoint. But I think, and I don't think I'm speaking out of turn here, but talking to people in the trucking industry, they'll be pretty frank about how they are an industry that likes to get things done, and they're focused on the business that they do and keeping things moving. Technology doesn't always go along for the ride that well with that, right? It's not always proactive thinking about cyber when we're trying to get the job done. So a lot of progress has been made, especially in the last 5 years, but I think trucking still lagged behind some of those other regulated industries like healthcare that were literally required by the government to be compliant for HIPAA or for some of these other things from a data collection standpoint. Whereas trucking, nope, we don't have any bodies to answer to or government to get audited by from a cyber standpoint, so they didn't do it. So it was ripe for the picking a little bit, and then there's a lot of data, but also those political motivations, I think, go a lot farther.
Yeah, when you had mentioned the importance of the supply chain, it made me think about the 2020 meltdown and how that actually corresponds with the statistics that I provided in the open about the 300% increase from 2020 to 2023, which may be because people realized how catastrophic a supply chain meltdown could be, and therefore the opportunity they have. So that's really great. I want to move on to a conversation about vulnerabilities specific to the trucking industry. But before I do that, I just want to give TrueNorth an opportunity to tell us a little bit about their service offerings.
A daunting emerging risk facing the transportation industry today centers on people's use of technology and data. In time, every business connected to the internet will be attacked. Cyber resiliency, data security, colleague education, and awareness. These issues are at the core of our rapidly advancing cyber solutions. As technology evolves and data utilization storage expands, we are here to assist you in navigating this complex and challenging risk set. Reach out to TrueNorth's cyber specialists and see how we can help.
Okay, so in 2021, we had that terrible terrorist attack, right? And I can recall conversations about that, about hardening our infrastructure, right? Everybody was very interested in how do we make ourselves more secure. And one of the threats that we were talking about in the trucking industry at the time is the possibility that a truck might get hijacked, right, by a human terrorist and driven into somewhere where maybe it shouldn't be. The inside lane called today's trucks hackable offices on wheels. You don't even need a human anymore. Are bad actors targeting both vehicles and back office? Do we have to worry about vulnerabilities in both places currently, or is most of the focus in one or the other?
Today, it's a lot of back office, right? That's the place where hackers have the knowledge, where they can rinse and repeat the attacks. And usually there's more vulnerabilities that exist in those places, right? They know what they're doing. However, I do think, and I think the University of Colorado did a study recently on the trucking industry and autonomous vehicles, et cetera. There is a lot of opportunity coming to that space. And I think that as the adoption of vehicle technology continues to evolve, and the computers on the truck's connected, the logging device is connected, we know where the truck is at, we can interact with the driver, all of those sort of things, and that technology gets more complex, it's going to be the next frontier for the transportation industry, both technology and security wise.
That feels scarier to me. That feels a lot scarier.
Right. It's and unfortunately, in the past, if they're attacking the back office, the technology's down. That's going to cost people time, energy, money, all of those sort of things. But when we transition to the truck, now you're talking physical harm. And that's a whole other ball game as far as scary things that can happen.
very, very sobering.
Yeah, it's bonkers.
Right?
How much doom and gloom can we pack into 30 minutes of a
Well,
conversation?
well, but I think to your guys' points, clearly the message so far is if you don't have a cybersecurity plan and a strategy, you need to get one, right? So, right, and so maybe kind of piggybacking off that a little bit, maybe you guys can talk a little bit about a high level overview of the major types of attacks that people should be aware of and concerned and pay attention to.
Yeah, I'll just hit quick and I'll let Aaron maybe talk more about the attacks, but having a program that addresses it similar to a company that has a safety and loss control program. You need to be having some sort of formalized process, and formalized is a hard word for some people, but there needs to be attention given at the same level to cyber risk that's given to more physical risks that we're used to seeing or that have been around for longer, like fires or storms or car accidents, because cyber is just as likely, if not more. And the attacks are coming at all angles. So we talked about social engineering. That is and continues to be on my side with the insurance. That's the most common thing that you see is the people element of you're getting tricked into doing something, paying someone, or giving information out through email, text message, clicking on a website, buying something online, whatever it might be. That's social engineering, and that can be addressed a little bit through some training and awareness. I'll let Aaron talk about the fun attacks that are more, I guess, rare but worse. We already hit on ransomware.
So you were talking about phishing attacks, is that right?
Okay. Right. Yep. Social engineering, phishing, with a PH. Whaling is going after the CEO, not somebody who's of a larger whale.
Okay. Follow-up question on the spelling of phishing. Okay. Was it a bunch of fish fans, like the band Fish Fans, who invented phishing?
Yep.
Like, why do we have it with a PH?
Technology people think they're funny if they can replace, numbers with letters or whatever it is that it might be. I'm sure there's probably some guy that's like, we're going to make this unique, and that's how we're going to do it.
Well, phishing actually is from phone. So that was tricking someone over the phone. And then there's smishing, which is text message phishing. Yes. So SMS text messages, that's where they got that. But yeah, no, that's good though. A bunch of fish fans
just hacking away on the lot, waiting for the show to start.
Yeah, while they're playing, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Hey, can I get a grilled cheese?
Yeah. No, I would completely agree with Clay. From a vulnerability perspective, the human factor cannot be underestimated as far as vulnerabilities that exist out there. There's definitely technology vulnerabilities that exist. There's been a string of what are called 0-day vulnerabilities that have come up. And those are basically software exploits. Something's wrong with the system, and before the manufacturer of that system has an opportunity to fix it, the bad guys figure out how to use that to create some sort of an attack. And it's very, very difficult to mitigate those because, there's no or very little solves available. So we see those relatively common. Clay mentioned a couple of other ones, things like distributed denial of service attacks or denial of service attacks, where the goal is to just make the system unavailable. Right. So if you're a small transportation company who maybe has their own software that they've built or they're hosting, whatever it is that might be, it's a huge vulnerability to be able to take that system down. And it's just something that you are maintaining yourself. And then, your ability to operate your organization goes down. So we could spend probably an hour talking about all of the technical vulnerabilities, but I pretty much classify everything into it's either the human factor or the technology factor. And the human factor is by far the more common attack vector to begin with.
Yeah, and even the technology factor, I would argue, is still human, because a human made it or touched it. Like you see these articles that come out and say, 90% of all cyber attacks are because of human error or human involvement. I would say it's 99.99%. It's semantics, because it all starts with someone touching it or not touching it, or a patch that wasn't applied by a person that was supposed to apply that patch, or a third party that you trusted to do it that didn't do it. So it comes down to computers do the job that they're set out or coded to do for the most part. It's who's using it. And as a decision maker, as a business owner, if you don't get on board with understanding that, it's only a matter of time. And then the corny thing, if it's not if, it's when, it's going to be you next. Like,
well, like Sean, you mentioned you've got an exceptionally nice security system at home, new router, firewall, those sort of things. I don't know how many individuals and businesses that are still sitting on the same equipment that they bought when Wi-Fi first came out, and it just works. It sits under their desk. However, it's probably trivial to be able to get onto that device now because nobody's even thought about it. It just sits there.
Well, we talked. It seems clear that our biggest vulnerability is our people. That's what I'm hearing from you all. How does a carrier then go about assessing that vulnerability? Like where in my organization do I need to look? What types of questions do I need to ask to understand the vulnerability and then to harden that attack vector?
Yeah, so I think for a long time, information security just kind of lived with the IT team, if you had one, or some sort of an outsourced partner, right? Like they're down in the basement, they're doing their job, all the stuff that they're supposed to do. So as long as everything works, it's fine. But I do think that starting with the IT team is always a good approach to it, and really understanding they know a lot. And they probably have things that they're aware of that maybe haven't bubbled all the way up to the leadership or operations team. So partnering with your technology team to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities out there that they're aware of that just haven't been fixed. I think that's absolutely a fantastic place to start. Leverage those partners or those other individuals that your organization relies on that may provide advisory services on vulnerabilities is often on really good. That's one of the things that Clay and I do. There's actually software out there that you can run on your network, or services you can pay for, that do what's called vulnerability scans, where they essentially look for bugs in the software or hardware that's outdated. And, back to the technology component of it, that's the best way to find those particular things.
yeah, the inverse of like when cyber insurance started hitting a lot of people's radar, obviously was tied to there was a lot more cyber events. But the good thing and bad thing to come out of that was cyber insurance applications were really the first like required checklist or set of controls that a company should adhere to, and they needed to fill that out in order to get insured for cyber events. That's a good thing, but it's pretty annoying having to fill that thing out every single year, especially if it's the CFO who's filling out a very technical application and probably answering it wrong. But Aaron and I saw that, and doing a cyber risk assessment, that's not just control based, but also has those control questions.
What does that
in it,
mean,
I think,
control based? I don't mean to interrupt. I just
like, do you have multi-factor authentication turned on for email? Do you have an endpoint detection and response software? What's your backup strategy? What are you using for backup? So is everything encrypted? It's very check yes, check no, right? So certain insurers would have a certain threshold that if you didn't have multi-factor authentication, well, we're not going to insure you anymore, or we're only going to insure you for a smaller amount than what the rest of your policy is. Aaron and I took that application and then took the next application, took a bunch of them from insurance carriers, and then we utilize a pretty well-known risk assessment or maturity assessment. And that, I feel like, has helped a ton of our clients really provide that base level of like, all right, we're at risk because it identifies how many people do you have, how much data do you have, what type of data do you have, what are all the controls that you have, and then from there you really build a plan around it.
So I think that's good advice. I think you mentioned, Clay, a bit ago about third parties and the fact that our industry uses a lot of third parties. Is there anything special that carriers should consider or think about when they're with cyber and how they're dealing with third parties? Is there anything unique about that relationship they need to be concerned about?
100%. Check your contracts if you can find them. I think contracts get signed, they get put away, and then they renew every single year. And then, or especially with like the rise of utilizing the cloud for offloading information, or, not hosting things on your own server that's held in your office. What else are you transferring away when you sign a contract for someone to take that over? Or for HR, for payroll, are you doing that in-house, or are you transferring that away? Well, who's liable if any of that information is exfiltrated? We've had a ton of companies, well, not a ton, but we've had a handful that, their security contract, or they outsourced their cybersecurity, and they thought that they were just doing everything, right? But then they had a patch to their system that wasn't applied, and that led to a ransomware event. So when they called their outsourced cybersecurity partner, they're like, "Hey, I thought you guys were on this," and it's like, "No, that was never part of our statement of work." So I think that's the I'm not saying go comb through every contract, but you need to have someone who understands those things and properly lays out where liabilities fall and lie, and you vet any third party before entering into, each year of that renewal.
So I like you're using some good examples here. I'm thinking about, Steve and I come into the office on Saturday because we work 6 days a week, just for the public record. And we can't get into our computers. Right? So I'm going to call you, Clay, because now you're my guy. What are you going to tell me to do? Like, how do I respond?
Say, call Aaron.
Yeah, too bad he's stuck in the basement with the rest of the IT department.
That's right.
Yeah, we'll give him a call.
Well, I think, usually that happens, and typically what would you do? You'd turn in a ticket to the help desk or something, but then it needs to be escalated, and then depending on what's causing that issue, like take CrowdStrike, for example. Someone was the first person to discover that they couldn't log in. What the hell's going on? That gets escalated. Then whoever leads that kind of escalates it up the chain. And then it's a fact-finding process of, is this real, or is this just a bug or a system failure? But I think the best advice is don't panic when that happens, but let's figure out how and why it's happening.
Yeah, and I think a lot of organizations don't spend the time to think about that ahead of time. And the first time that they're like, "Oh, what do we do?" It's when they're right in the middle of that, right? So ensuring that one, your operations and your technology team understands what they should do if that particular situation comes up, but also then extending that level of visibility down to everybody at the organization. So you, as just a standard user of the system, when do I report something? When do I not? What do I say if somebody asks me about a particular cyber incident? What don't I say? All of those things become a whole lot easier to be able to respond to if you've talked about it previously.
Yeah. And how often do we talk to companies, or do we do like tabletop exercises, which are simulated kind of cyber breaches, to practice that exact thing, like what would happen? And it seems like we're on almost like 4 out of 5 average for when the what hits the fan. Someone says, "We're unplugging the internet," and then the next question is, "Well, we need to tell our employees. I guess we'll email them." And then Aaron's like, "Well, you don't have internet anymore." So that's why I say don't panic and kind of think through the thought process. And that's why it's good to practice that, because everyone's first initial thing is, someone's in my system, I'm unplugging the internet and I'm disconnecting. It's like, that doesn't solve the problem. It might make it worse.
It might make it worse. Boy, I'm ready to snip right away.
Yeah. And I know this isn't entirely an insurance conversation, but I think as we talk about coverage and how do we respond to those sort of events, that's really a place where an insurance policy can be a game changer and a lifesaver, because what they allow you to do is connect with industry professionals that deal with this 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And their whole goal is, how do we stop it? How do we get you recovered? And then how do we get your operations back up and running? And those professionals are just absolutely amazing at what they do.
So I think it's very interesting, because I think the first to you're at the last training conversation, when something's wrong, your first reaction is to turn off all the equipment. But I think what you're saying I'm hearing you guys say is, as part of your plan, it's not just about the technology, it's about the people, and your plan has to address both. And I think a lot of trucking companies probably don't even have, or don't, maybe I'm wrong, but probably don't have the training program or what to do when something happens, right? Here's the scenarios that could happen. How should you respond? So is that something that's really important as part, and maybe those tabletop exercises are really important for that reason. So you know what to do when certain things take place, right?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. And that this ties all into everything because trucking companies are built a little different, or they might have subsidiaries and they might have, a different office that those people aren't trained the same way. Obviously it starts with kind of leadership and creating that culture of this is important. That trickles down to IT being elevated to speak their mind and eloquently say like this is important and this is what we're doing about it. But then it's the people who interact with the sensitive information that they might not think is sensitive, but if they've got an email address, they're on the network somewhere. So yeah, it is a trickle down effect, but it's all the culture you create and human and technology living in harmony.
Well, so Aaron, you mentioned insurance, and if I'm being honest, as I am sometimes too honest on this particular podcast, I think I knew that you could insure all kinds of risk, but I've not ever thought about insuring against cyber risk, mostly because, there's an IT person who's probably responsible for that, but whose head may roll if something bad happens. Can you tell us about how a carrier goes about insuring against cyber attacks? What are the types of questions that they have to answer from y'all? The types of coverages? Like how does this all work?
It's weird, isn't it? Like you don't think that you could insure against like a criminal activity or something. But yeah, it's an insurance policy. It started as like a liability policy, like any other insurance coverage, but it starts pretty typical for insurance is filling out an application, and it's rated based on what industry you're in, how much your revenue is, and then kind of how much data you have. But that's pretty much the gist. There's multiple carriers out there, more and more every day, that insure against cyber. The policy form itself, it was really tough to get and keep insurance for cyber, but underwriters have started to kind of figure that out of where they need to price, what questions they need to ask. So it's gotten a little easier, honestly. And there's probably a right fit for everyone. It's got like one master limit, which is usually in increments of $1 million. And then it covers everything you could pretty much think of for cyber. And it changes pretty much every year in terms of what they're adding for. So everything we've talked about, a ransomware incident, yeah, that would be covered on a cyber policy, both to pay the actual ransom if that decision is made, but also all of the expenses you accrue, like getting a legal team surrounding you to say, you actually do have information that needs to be notified to this regulatory body. It pays out for business interruption. So if you're down for any considerable amount of time and you lose revenue, or you have people working overtime, that is covered under the cyber policy. Dependent business interruption. So even if you're not hacked at all, it has nothing to do with your system, but someone that you rely on to do your job is hacked and you're down because you can't do anything, that's covered under your own policy. And then if someone gets duped into paying for gift cards for the whole company because they, got phished, there's coverage for that on cyber policy. There's also coverage for reputational harm.
I was going to ask about that one.
So you're hacked, and now no one wants to talk to Sean anymore or do podcasts with him anymore because he's got a shady business.
Yeah, I don't even need to be hacked for that, but
or a motor carrier, they lose contracts because people directly say, I don't want to work with you anymore because I don't trust that your systems are, have the integrity of keeping my data safe. That is an insurable loss that can be covered under cyber policy too.
Those are some great examples. Are there? So if you were advising, I know you guys do a lot of consulting services with their clients on this, but if you're advising a carrier that is out there and has their insurance policy, is there anything specific they should be looking at or paying attention to when they're looking at their existing policy as an area to really focus in on here?
For sure. Always check, that you have. We get asked all the time, like, am I carrying enough insurance? And I'm never the person to say, buy more insurance, buy more insurance, buy more, unless it comes from a place of you have $250,000 of cyber insurance when you have a $1 billion revenue company, right? I think the first thing is looking at the limits of coverage that you purchase and the deductibles or retentions that you set, because that's the true risk management conversation that needs to be happening. For the most part, the exclusions and the sublimits and things, that all ties back to when we talked about risk assessments. When Aaron and I work with clients and they identify that they don't have any kind of risk against data, they don't store anything that's sensitive, well, then that's probably not as important. But what do you have a risk for? Reputational harm. We want to make sure that you have full limits for that. A waiting period is another big deal that's kind of different. That's kind of like a deductible, but it's a time period that you have. Some policies have 18-hour waiting periods and some have 8. So in that CrowdStrike scenario, when things were down, it was back in a day. But if you have a policy that has, a 12-hour waiting period and that CrowdStrike thing hung out all weekend long, you'd have to wait until that 12 hours is up until you could, keep track of how much money you're losing or how much overtime you're paying. But I'm never going to tell someone to read their entire insurance policy from front to back, because that's kind of our job. But I think definitely question your broker if it's not TrueNorth, but also question us of how did we arrive at the limit that we're purchasing for insurance. And if your price seems high, question how it was rated, question what you're doing on your application. I know I kind of answered that question with, yeah, look at everything, but to a certain extent, look at who you're working with and how you fill those things out.
I find it interesting and compelling that I can insure against a cyber attack that doesn't impact me, right? So I'm thinking about a telematics provider that maybe got hacked and it influenced your operations. All of a sudden your cameras wouldn't work or your ELD wasn't working or whatever, and that interrupted my business or created non-compliance challenges. I hadn't even thought about that should be something that I'm thinking about. I think that's super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, go back to the third-party risk. I mean, it's massive. And as we adopt more cloud technologies and all of these different things where we're relying upon somebody that our realm of control is rather limited, kind of handing the keys over, right? And hoping that, not to use some sort of analogy, that the truck starts every single day. And when it doesn't, because that party isn't available, I mean, reputational harm, are you delivering the loads? Do you know what you need to pick up? All of those things start to become questioning. And, still got to pay my driver. What's my penalty going to be for not getting this load on time? I mean, all of those things start to add up very, very quickly.
So I want to buy an insurance policy. When I come to you, Clay or Aaron, what types of assessments are you going to perform on my business? Are you going to help me with a threat vulnerability, or are we just going to look at sort of opportunities for, is it just based on the amount of data that I have to deal with, or are you sort of opening the door on all of the systems and the ones and zeros?
Yeah, if you came and you wanted to get insurance in place, that process by itself is relatively painless and pretty easy and quick. We can get quotes on cyber insurance faster than probably any other line of insurance coverage. Even if you are 100 million in revenue company, it usually requires at the very least 3 things: the name of your company, the industry you're in, and how much revenue you have. Obviously, we want to know a little bit more about, some of the controls we talked about earlier, but that is only going to help kind of drive where your premium comes in down. But where Aaron and I take the approach is, after you've kind of gone through that round 1 and placed kind of that risk transfer piece, that's great. But if we want to start influencing the price of that insurance or playing with taking a higher deductible so you can kind of self-insure or bet on yourself that you're not going to get hacked, that's where we come in and fully assess the rest of the company. So the insurance is, it renews one time every year. We're there the other 364 days to really help be a project manager and driver and a fractional resource for the IT team to like increase the threshold that you're not going to ever have to use this insurance policy. But we don't make everyone go through kind of this long risk assessment process, but we offer that to people who we maybe identify like, hey, you answered no to 8 out of 12 of those questions that really other companies in your industry answer yes to pretty easily.
Yeah,
we should probably take
it's typically a pretty bad day when you have to call the insurance company and file a cyber claim. Like nobody wants to go through that. And so, Clay and R's goal when we work with organizations is always to figure out how we can make it so that the likelihood of them ever having to file a cyber claim goes down, which is good for that organization more so than just relying upon a cyber policy being in place. And, we do that through our assessments, but ultimately our goal is to be able to communicate the real cyber risks and challenges from the IT team that may be in the basement, or hopefully they're not, they're sitting next to the leadership team, wherever it is that they are, but to be able to make rational business decisions on here's what we could change, and if we don't change it, here's what it might cost us, or here's the problems that might cause.
Well, I think that's where it sounds like, it's one of those things where you just don't want to set it and forget it. And I think that's where your guys' consulting services probably come in good handy, because you just don't want to pay attention to it once a year during renewal, because things are constantly changing and evolving, and the threats are constantly in flux. And that ongoing support that you all provide probably is a huge value to your customers in that regard. Moore's law no longer is in effect. 18 months is out the window a long time ago. It's probably more like 18 days. But I think that's good counsel there.
Well, this conversation has been very interesting. We're coming to a close. I think I'm pulling a few themes here that cyber is at least as much about ones and zeros as it is about humans and how they respond. I think we should move our IT departments out of the basement and offer them a seat at the table so that they can help us assess those risks, and that this is an insurable thing and that we should really think about it. Do you think the calculation is the same for small carriers versus big carriers? Obviously the level of insurance would be different, but is the concern the same? Or, maybe we're not hacking trucks yet, and maybe when we start hacking trucks more actively, then it becomes a bigger concern for those smaller motor carriers. But do you think everybody should focus on this, or do you think it's just 100 million and above?
I think everybody needs to focus on this. And I'm sorry, Clay, if I'm speaking for you. I think that, whether or not you're a small trucking company with a couple of trucks, or whether or not you have thousands of them, your inability to utilize your technology to be able to perform your daily business can be a bankrupting event if you're not paying attention to it. And so that's everything from, again, small to large. Just the complexity of your organization varies.
Yeah. And my answer is, if the skull and crossbones shows up on your computer screen or your employee's computer screen, and they demand, let's even use a low number, $250,000 in return for booting everything back up, restoring the data that you lose, whatever it is, do you feel comfortable paying that amount? And do you have a team around you that's on speed dial to call in the event that happens? If you don't, then cyber insurance is not as expensive as you think that it is, or as people think that it is. So for those smaller ones, that's kind of I think, true leverage. That's maybe a misconception, is that it's not just about like, will this ever happen to me? It's even if something small happens, the cyber policy is your team to help you through that and turn it into a non-event. For the bigger companies, same thing, larger scale. But the pricing, the availability, it's really easy. It's easier than what a lot of articles will make it seem, I'd say. I might bite my tongue on that one. I get a call from someone who's got a crazy business in multiple states
Yeah.
and all these other subsidiaries.
Nobody's ever accused insurance of being easy. So, but,
Right.
but I do have to say, Clay, you're about the most positive person I've ever talked to on cybersecurity. We got a good cop, bad cop thing going. It's a little different because, Aaron's a white hat hacker, not a black hat hacker, but I still see the dynamic there. It's very good. Very good. Well, I want to give Steve an opportunity to provide some of his final thoughts, but before that, I want to say thank you guys. I feel like, we've been about 50 minutes in this conversation. We could probably go for another 4 hours. This is super interesting stuff. I'm sure we'll have y'all back as these threats continue to develop and as people become more aware of them. I think it's something we're all going to be thinking about, and hopefully this podcast can raise some visibility on the issue. So I want to say thank you. I think you guys are great. Clay, I appreciate your positiveness. Aaron, keep up the white hacking because that makes you really cool.
No, thank you guys. Just to finish up, I think to me the biggest thing I got out of this is if you're listening to this and you're not paying attention, you need to, because it needs to be core to your business, because that our industry is very interconnected, right? And so we rely on technology regardless of how big or small you are, and so it's critical that you have this as part of your core business, and make sure to call TrueNorth to get some help.
There you go. There it is.
Yeah, love it.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate your time today. And again, we'll be reaching out, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode of TrueNorth Truck Thought. If you enjoyed the topic today and want to tune in for future conversations here on the TTT Pod, make sure to follow us. Also, please don't hesitate to let us know which topics you want us to cover in future episodes. Drop us a line in the comments section or send us an email to transportationnews@truenorthcompanies.com. Thanks and have a safe day.